Europe is preparing for nuclear war with Russia. In 2026, the world plunged into nuclear madness. Discussions about the need to create a nuclear shield are taking place every day, and at the same time, it seems that even such pacifist and neutral countries as Sweden, which for a long time refused to join NATO at all, are now considering a radical militarization. And the reasons here, of course, are not surprising, they are obvious. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, nuclear threats have become the main deterrent factor for the Kremlin authorities. If the Russian army loses control over a city or another threat of internal crisis arises, Vladimir Putin and some of his hawks who advocate for the destruction of the world bring up the special red button in the office of the Russian president. The hype, as befits the most flamboyant politician of our time, is fueled by Donald Trump, who claimed that the United States possesses weapons that Moscow could not even dream of. All of this has become a logical consequence of the Doomsday Clock, which symbolizes the end of the world, once again moving closer to midnight. How did work on nuclear weapons begin in Stockholm, and what would have to happen for Putin to press that very red button? Let's figure this out together. Hello everyone, my name is Anastasiia Husarieva, and I'd like to ask you to give this video a like right away and also subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And as we go along with this kind of dialogue, feel free to share your thoughts about what you hear in the comments below this video. So I'll provide the information, and from you, likes, subscriptions, and comments. Now let's really get to the bottom of what's going on. Let's go! For the first time in decades, Sweden has publicly indicated its readiness to discuss participation in European nuclear deterrence mechanisms. The reason for this was statements made by Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson in comments to the Swedish public broadcaster SVT. According to him, Stockholm has held preliminary consultations with France and the United Kingdom regarding possible cooperation in the field of nuclear deterrence. As Kristersson emphasizes, this is not about concrete proposals or specific timelines. The discussions are at the very earliest stage. However, the very fact of such statements is seen as a significant shift in Sweden's rhetoric on nuclear policy. For a country that has consistently adhered to a policy of renouncing its own nuclear weapons since the 1960s, such public comments appear quite uncharacteristic. These remarks were made against the backdrop of broader European discussions, which are no longer news to us, about increasing autonomy in the field of security within NATO, especially amid uncertainty over the United States' long-term commitments and a depiction of heightened geopolitical tensions. The context of these statements is reinforced by the publication of the unclassified version of the National Defense Strategy by the United States Department of Defense. The document outlines the dual approach of the administration of Donald Trump, President of the United States, to deterring Russia. On the one hand, it concerns the buildup of American nuclear capabilities. On the other, it involves reducing the U.S. military presence in Europe and transferring greater responsibility for the continent's security to European allies. According to observers, it is precisely this logic that is pushing European countries to discuss their own deterrence mechanisms. Responding to a question about Sweden's reaction to France's initiatives, Kristersson emphasized that after joining NATO, the country is fully involved in all discussions, including those concerning nuclear weapons in Europe. At the same time, he cautioned that this does not mean there is an intention to actually use nuclear weapons. According to him, as long as dangerous countries possess nuclear weapons, democratic states must have access to them as a deterrent. When asked for clarification about the possibility of Sweden participating in a joint nuclear program, for example with France, the Prime Minister answered in the affirmative, adding that relevant discussions have already begun. The prominent domestic military publication Defense Express recently pointed out that even such a cautious and measured statement appears to be highly significant for the current strategic situation. In fact, this is the first statement by a Swedish leader of this level since the country officially shut down its own nuclear program in the 1960s. At that time, the decision to abandon the program was driven not only by financial reasons, but also by international pressure, which culminated in the signing of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968. Sweden's historical experience makes the current statements being made particularly sensitive. In the 1950s and 1960s, the country seriously considered the possibility of developing its own nuclear weapons and had the technological base to do so. However, the program was halted in particular under the influence of the United States of America and as part of the formation of the global non-proliferation regime. That is why, until recently, any discussions about nuclear deterrence remained virtually taboo in Swedish politics. Against this backdrop, the Prime Minister's admission that Stockholm is participating in relevant European discussions appears to be a significant shift in approach. At the same time, Kristersson, as many political experts frequently note, is also very well aware of the significant limitations of Europe's current nuclear defense capabilities and infrastructure. French President Emmanuel Macron stated back in March 2025 that French nuclear weapons should become a deterrent factor for all of Europe. However, the scale of the French nuclear arsenal is objectively limited, and the question of extending it to cover the entire continent remains a matter of debate. The United Kingdom, possessing its own nuclear forces, is also part of this complex architecture, closely linked to the United States of America. Similar discussions are unfolding in Germany as well. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has officially stated that Berlin is currently actively engaged in deep discussions with European leaders and international partners regarding various potential frameworks and strategic formats for joint nuclear deterrence that could effectively serve to complement and strengthen the existing American nuclear umbrella. At the same time, he emphasized that such discussions are only at an early stage and do not imply any immediate decisions. Merz reminded that Germany is bound by international legal obligations that prohibit it from possessing its own nuclear weapons. In this context, there are two key treaties being referred to. The first is the 2+4 Treaty, or the Treaty on the Final Settlement with respect to Germany. The second is the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. According to the Chancellor, the existence of these agreements means that the creation of its own nuclear arsenal is not within Germany's competence or responsibility. However, he emphasized this does not preclude discussions with other European states regarding joint forms of nuclear deterrence. Merz also specifically noted that such discussions do not contradict cooperation with the United States of America. On the contrary, they can be seen as a supplement to existing mechanisms, similar to how nuclear deterrence is currently implemented through the cooperation of France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. We know that we have to make strategic and military political decisions, the Chancellor stated, but the time for that has not yet come. According to him, Europe is not yet at the stage of having strategic discussions with the interested countries. Thus, the discussion of nuclear deterrence is gradually moving beyond a narrow circle of experts and is increasingly being raised at the highest political leadership level of European states, while still remaining in the phase of preliminary and cautious consultations. In parallel with statements from current leaders, increasingly tough rhetoric is also coming from former high-ranking officials. Former German Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer has publicly spoken in favor of creating a joint nuclear arsenal for the European Union. He explained his position by the changed security situation and the uncertainty of future guarantees from the United States. At the same time, Fischer emphasizes that this is not about creating a German bomb. According to him, given its historical past, Germany should not act alone. In a comment to Tagesspiegel, Fischer stated that nuclear weapons should be developed jointly within the European Union, not by any single country. He directly pointed out that, in his opinion, Europe can no longer fully rely on American security guarantees. Europe must do this because America's security guarantees are now uncertain, he emphasized, adding that Germany must never act alone again. The former minister also acknowledged that current threats have forced him to reconsider his previous views. He described the concept of disarmament as outdated and said that deterrence is only possible if there is strength. Against this backdrop, German media are publishing assessments of the country's technical capabilities. The newspaper Bild, citing experts, notes that Germany is theoretically capable of developing its own nuclear weapons within 3 years. These assessments, however, are presented purely as technical rather than political scenarios and do not indicate the existence of any corresponding decision or intention. A separate place in these discussions is occupied by the factor of Russia as the main nuclear threat. Former advisor to Putin Boris and Boris Yeltsin, Sergei Karaganov, stated that Russia may use nuclear weapons against Europe if it finds itself close to defeat in the war against Ukraine. According to Karaganov, even the approach of such a defeat would be grounds for an immediate nuclear strike. Karaganov claims that in such a scenario, Europe would be physically destroyed, and he calls the very possibility of Russia's defeat a fantastic illusion. He also accused European leaders of intellectual incapacity and stated that Europe has lost its status as one of the centers of global power. The increase in such statements coincides with the intensification of alarming signals, but this time from the scientific community. On Tuesday, the Doomsday Clock, which symbolizes how close humanity is to global catastrophe, was set to 85 seconds to midnight, 4 seconds closer than the previous year. The atomic scientists pointed to the increased risk of a new nuclear arms race, especially in light of the expiration of the latest nuclear arms reduction treaty between the United States and Russia. An additional risk factor cited is the record high levels of carbon dioxide emissions, which are intensifying climate change, as well as the development of artificial intelligence, which, according to scientists, could accelerate chaos in the global information environment. The intensification of disinformation and the undermining of fact-based public discussions complicate decision-making on such critically important issues as nuclear war, pandemics, and climate change. Since its creation at the beginning of the Cold War, the Doomsday Clock has been moved 26 times, reflecting a growing sense of global instability. And as you can see, it was recently moved again. Now the hands show that there are 85 seconds left until midnight, and midnight, according to scientists, is exactly that threshold, the threshold of the end of the world. Let's see how events will unfold next. Please, I would appreciate it if you could like this video and write in the comments how quickly you think the Doomsday Clock's hands will move. And of course, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any important news in the future. And we'll see you in the next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husarieva. Please take care of yourselves, wash your hands with soap, and kisses to everyone on the nose. Bye, everyone.